You won't believe what started as a simple afternoon in the garden turned into one of the most emotionally stirring days of my life. I'd only asked for a bit of help with the soil, but my husband's friend showed up with more than just tools. What unfolded between us left me questioning the quiet spaces of my own heart. Have you ever had a moment that made you pause just a little too long? Before we get into it, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far our little stories travel. Let me take you back to where it all began. The sun had just begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the worn bricks of our patio. It was one of those early spring afternoons when the breeze is soft but still carries the bite of winter. I was in the backyard, gloved hands deep in a stubborn patch of weeds near the hydrangeas. Gardening had always been my quiet joy, therapeutic even, but after a particularly rainy week, the soil was thick and unforgiving. My knees ached, my back more so. That morning, over breakfast, I had casually mentioned to my husband that the garden was becoming too much for me lately. He'd nodded in that distracted way he does when he's reading the news on his phone. Maybe I'll ask Marcus to swing by, he mumbled. He knows his way around a spade. Marcus, I hadn't seen much of him over the last few years. He used to come by often when we were younger. Cookouts, game nights, holidays. Always laughing, always charming in that easy, unbothered way. My husband's best friend since college. There was a time I thought he might have had a thing for me back then, but maybe that was just my imagination, stirred by his sideways glances, or the way he always brought me my favorite wine without ever asking. I didn't expect him to actually show up, but around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I straightened up, rubbing dirt off my palms, and turned just in time to see him stepping out of his truck, a toolbox in one hand, garden gloves tucked in his belt. "Hey, stranger," he called, flashing that same grin I remembered too well. "Heard someone needed rescuing from the wilderness." I laughed, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. I'm not sure if it's the wilderness or just my aging back giving up on me. He stepped closer and gave me a quick once-over. Not the rude kind, more like he was taking inventory of time. "You look good, Sophia." I felt the warmth rise to my cheeks. I was 62 after all. Compliments came less frequently these days. "You're just being polite," I said, chuckling as I motioned toward the overgrown flower. But we got to work side by side. He was stronger than I remembered, more filled out in the shoulders, though he moved slower now too, with that same creeping age that reminded me we were no longer in our 30s. But even in silence he was easy to be around. Conversation flowed naturally between instructions and playful banter. At one point he pulled a worm out of the soil and held it up like a trophy, making me laugh so hard I nearly tipped over the flower pot I was repotting. The moment started to shift when our hands brushed over the same tell. Just a fleeting touch, fingers colliding. But something lingered. He paused, glanced at me. Our eyes locked a little too long before I looked away, pretending to be distracted by a sprig of lavender. "I missed this," he said softly, returning to the soil. "Missed what?" "Being around you." My breath caught in my throat. I stayed quiet, unsure how to respond, unsure if I should even entertain the thought behind those words. But the air felt different after that. Like a door had been left ajar between us, and neither of us dared to shut it. As we took a break on the patio steps, sipping lemonade I'd brought out, the silence felt heavier. Not awkward, but weighted with something unsaid. He turned to me, his voice low. "Do you ever think about how things might have been if life had taken a different turn?" I looked at him, really looked. His face had changed with time, lines, a touch of gray in the beard, but his eyes still held that same flicker of warmth, that same question they used to ask years ago when no one else was looking. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for my glass, my fingers trembling just slightly. There was something dangerous about that moment, something I didn't want to name. And yet I didn't walk away. Not then. Not when he leaned slightly closer. Not even when the wind shifted and carried the scent of cut grass and lilacs through the yard, blending with something older, nostalgia maybe, or longing. We didn't say much for the rest of the afternoon, but the silence between us had changed. It wasn't empty. It was full of every word we didn't say. When he finally stood to leave, brushing dirt from his jeans, he looked at me one last time. "If you ever need more help," he said quietly, "you know where to find me." I nodded. "Thanks for everything." As the truck pulled away down the gravel path, I stood there, gloves still in hand, heart pounding harder than it had in a long time. I didn't know what I'd ask for next time, but I knew it wouldn't be about the garden. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the usual peaceful way I'd grown used to over the years. There was a noise underneath the calm, like a hum I couldn't ignore. I kept thinking about that moment on the patio, the way Marcus had looked at me, the way he'd said, "I missed this." It replayed in my mind when I washed dishes, when I watered the roses, even when I lay next to my husband at night listening to his gentle snore. I didn't know what I was feeling exactly. It wasn't guilt, but it wasn't innocence either. Just confusion, a kind of awakening I hadn't expected at this point in my life. 3 days later I found myself standing in the garden again, holding a towel, but not really working. I'd already weeded the beds twice, trimmed the hedges, and raked soil that didn't need raking. My hands were busy but my mind kept drifting. That's when I heard his truck. I didn't call him. I hadn't even mentioned anything to my husband, but there it was. Same tires on the gravel, same engine hum, same slow door creak. I turned and there he was, walking toward me with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Figured you might need a break," he said, holding one out with a sheepish smile. I took it without saying much. "You didn't have to come." "I know. I wanted to." We stood in the garden sipping coffee, the morning sun still stretching itself across the fence. He looked more relaxed this time, like he knew I wouldn't turn him away. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," I said finally. Marcus didn't respond right away. He bent down, picked a fallen petal off the grass, and rolled it between his fingers. "I'm not here to make trouble, Sophia. You're married. I know that. I like talking to you, being around you." "I'm 62, I whispered as if that explained everything. He chuckled. "And you think that's a problem? You're beautiful. You've always been." That word, beautiful, landed differently. It had been a long time since someone had said it without it sounding like an obligation. A polite afterthought. "You're making it hard to think straight," I murmured. "I'm not asking you to think, just feel for a moment." I hated how easily my defenses crumbled, but it wasn't just flattery. It was something deeper, like he saw through the version of me I showed the world, and noticed the woman underneath, the one who still longed to be desired, understood. We walked around the yard pointing out plants, commenting on how well the lemon tree was doing this year. Normal things. But our hands brushed again more than once, and once he let his fingers linger a little longer. I didn't pull away. Later we sat on the back porch steps. I could feel the warmth of his arm next to mine, not touching, but close enough that I noticed every time he shifted. I don't know what came over me, but I turned to him and asked, "Did you ever regret not settling down?" His answer was slow, thoughtful. "I think I regret not fighting harder for the things I wanted. Back then I didn't know how to speak up. And now," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "I'm trying not to miss another chance." I looked at him, really looked this time, and for the first time I allowed myself to remember how it felt to be looked at with admiration, not obligation. It had been years since anyone had gazed at me like I was something special. "I'm not a woman who cheats," I said, though my voice sounded far away like someone else had said it. He nodded. "I'm not a man who pushes." The moment stretched between us again, like the pause between lightning and thunder, full of tension, full of anticipation. But nothing happened. No stolen kiss, no reckless decision, just silence, and the realization that I wasn't as invisible as I thought I'd become. When he stood to leave again, he didn't say much. He just touched my shoulder gently, respectfully, and gave me a small smile. "I'll let you get back to your garden." I watched him go, heart beating faster than it had any right to. I wasn't sure what was blooming faster, my flowers or something else entirely. And for the first time in a long while I didn't feel alone. That night after Marcus left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside my husband, the soft pillow of the nightlight casting familiar shadows on the wall. He stirred once or twice, mumbled something in his dreams, then settled back into steady breathing. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic tick of the wall clock. I wasn't unhappy in my marriage, not exactly. My husband and I had shared decades together. We raised a daughter, paid off our home, celebrated birthdays and quiet holidays, and endured the occasional rough season. But over time, something delicate had faded. The conversations became shorter, the kisses more routine, the touches more out of habit than hunger. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't full. And now, with just a few short exchanges in a backyard, Marcus had stirred something I didn't even know I'd missed. Not lust, though I'd be lying if I said he wasn't still a handsome man, but something else. Attention, soft curiosity, a feeling of being seen. The next day I told myself I wouldn't reach out, but I did. I sent a text that said simply, "I found an old planter in the shed. Could use your thoughts on where to place it." He replied within a minute. "Be there in 20. When he arrived, he didn't bring tools, just a small paper bag with pastries and a thermos of coffee. We didn't talk much at first. We sat on the bench under the arbor, sipping coffee while birds fluttered in the feeder beside us. The air felt thick with everything we hadn't said. Finally, I broke the silence. "I don't know what this is." He didn't ask me to clarify. He knew. "Neither do I," he said gently. "But I know it makes me feel awake." I looked down at my hands, my wedding band glinting in the light. "I couldn't want to hurt anyone." "You haven't," he said softly. "And I'm not here to pull you into anything you're not ready for. But if I'm being honest, I thought about you for years. I just never thought I'd have the chance to tell you." My chest tightened. "Why now?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe because time reminds us how few chances we get to speak our truth." I looked at him. Really looked. The way the lines around his eyes deepened when he smiled, the flecks of silver in his beard, the familiar warmth in his gaze. There was no pressure, no urgency, just presence. We spent the next hour walking through the garden. He offered suggestions on where the planter could go, but most of the time we wandered aimlessly, like two people trying to map a new landscape. Careful, slow, curious. As we passed the rose bushes, I stopped. "I used to feel beautiful here," I said almost to myself. "This garden made me feel useful, creative, like I still mattered." "You still do," he said without missing a beat. "More than you know." He wasn't trying to win me. That's what made it harder. He was just telling the truth. The kind that slips through the cracks when you're not guarding your heart. Later, as he walked me back to the patio, I reached out and touched his arm. "I need time," I said. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. That evening, I prepared dinner with strange calm. My husband sat at the table going on about a documentary he'd watched. I smiled and nodded. Part of me present, part of me elsewhere. I wasn't plotting or hiding, just feeling different, more alive. After dinner, I stepped out into the garden alone. The air had cooled, the sky in deep lavender. I sat on the same bench under the arbor where Marcus and I had shared our coffee. I closed my eyes and took a breath, feeling the earth beneath me, the soft breeze across my cheek, the ache in my chest that was equal parts longing and fear. I wasn't sure where this path was going, but I knew I had stepped onto it. Not recklessly, not with the intention to betray, but with the quiet, complicated hope that maybe, just maybe, life still held surprises even for women like me. The next few days passed in a strange kind of in-between. I moved through them with practiced grace, folding laundry, answering calls for my daughter, sharing meals with my husband. But my inner world was shifting gently like soil being turned beneath the surface. I didn't see Marcus. He didn't text. Didn't stop by. And I understood why. He was giving me space. And strangely, that silence wasn't cold. It was respectful. A quiet reminder that he meant what he said. He wasn't going anywhere, and he wouldn't push me to decide before I was ready. It gave me room to think, to breathe. I spent more time in the garden than usual, my hands deep in dirt, pruning back the roses, replanting a few neglected pots. It felt like reclaiming something, like finding parts of myself I'd let fall asleep over the years. I found myself asking hard questions. Had I given up on being seen? Had I convinced myself that the kind of attention Marcus offered was no longer meant for women my age? And what did I really want? I wasn't looking for a new relationship. I wasn't looking to destroy the one I had. But I couldn't ignore the truth. Something in me had come alive again. And I wasn't ready to bury it just to keep things quiet. So I did something unexpected. I told my husband I needed a few days to myself. I booked a small cabin just outside town. Nothing extravagant. Just quiet and green, surrounded by trees. He was surprised but didn't argue. Maybe he sensed something. Or maybe he trusted me. After 36 years of marriage, you learn when to hold on and when to give someone space. I packed light, a book, a journal, and one of Marcus's pastries I'd frozen just in case. The first night at the cabin, I sat by the window watching the trees sway in the wind, thinking about my life, my marriage, my choices, my regrets. And then, without overthinking, I took out my phone and texted Marcus. I'm away for a few days. Not running, just figuring things out. He replied almost instantly. I hope the trees are kind to you. That night I slept deeply. No guilt, no shame, just peace. On the third day, I sat on the little porch with a cup of tea, listening to the quiet when a familiar truck pulled up. My heart leaped and settled all in the same moment. Marcus stepped out slowly, holding nothing this time. No coffee, no tools, no flowers, just himself. He walked up the steps and sat down beside me. For a while we didn't say anything. There was no need. Finally I spoke. I think I got lost in being everything for everyone else. And somewhere in that, I forgot I was still allowed to feel something new. He nodded. You're allowed, Sophia. You always have been. I turned to look at him. But I'm not going to leave my husband. I know, he said gently. I didn't expect you to. What happened between us? It wasn't about changing my life. It was about remembering I still have one. He reached over and took my hand. Not in possession, not in longing, but in understanding. And I'm grateful, I whispered. You reminded me that I still matter. That I'm not invisible. We sat like that until the sun dipped behind the trees, casting a warm golden light across the porch. There were no dramatic declarations, no plans, no promises, just a quiet goodbye. He stood, kissed the top of my head and left. And I let him go, not with pain but with something softer, something like grace. When I returned home the next morning, my husband was in the kitchen making coffee, the paper folded beside him. You look rested, he said without looking up. I feel rested, I replied. He poured me a cup and slid it across the counter. Our hands touched. This time I didn't pull away. That afternoon I returned to the garden. My hands found the soil. The air was warm. The lemon tree had started to bloom again. And so had I.